Kosta, Makreus and Hollis Polk had a collective of more than 11,000 peaceful groups and individuals from 100 plus countries who join once a month to make coordinated, interactive and united contact with numerous loving and peaceful ET civilizations. And they're joining us today. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing, Dean?
I'm pretty good. It's great to have you. We've been wanting to talk to both of you guys for quite some time now, because it's a wonderful initiative that you have got going here, and through our friend Mike Moorberg, who's brought us together. Let's have a look and find out what it's all about. So I thought, first up, let's talk about your community and what it is all about.
Yes. Well, we're the ET Let's Talk community. And my little commercial break here is at etletstalk.com, free membership. I started it in 2014, or actually 2012, and we've grown to about 50,000 people now in more than 100 countries. And the whole premise is that we can and successfully do make contact with many star civilizations that are visiting our planet at this time by teaching people how to do that. And it's a wonderful thing to do, because everyday people can do it. And Hollis and I, for example, are good examples of, we're just everyday people who had our own experiences a few years ago that were up close and personal, that totally convinced us that these civilizations are here. And so I decided that I would organize people worldwide to form a community and to have these monthly meditations where our people join virtually, because we're in all the different time zones. Most of us will never meet, but we use our imagination, visualization, and what are called the close encounter of the fifth kind protocols to contact our UFO/ET/star people friends, who then communicate with us. So this is a very interactive, widespread movement, the largest of its kind, that is making this human-initiated, interactive communication with star civilizations visiting the Earth. So right. That's it in a nutshell. And there are reasons we're doing that. There's a vision of where this is going to go, and so much more. But basically, that's in a nutshell. Yeah. I don't know if Hollis wants to add anything.
You did a great job.
Yeah, so the CE5 Protocol, so how did you come up with those in the beginning?
I didn't come up with those. Those were put out there by Stephen Greer initially. Now, what's happened in the years since is that many groups, once they discover an initial protocol, will customize it. So there's many customized versions of it. But what I will say is that at the very core of it, what's important is to have an attitude of goodwill, an open mind about this experience that you want to have, an open heart, because it's all about the consciousness, about the vibration you're putting out, the place where you're at. That is what announces your presence to some of these civilizations, who can detect you by your vibration, by frequency. Because as Nikola Tesla said, the whole universe is nothing but frequency. So the secret sauce to the core of the CE5 protocol, protocols, the many that are out there, at the core is to have a loving intention, goodwill, and openness, an invitation to meet these civilizations, instead of having fear, criticism, wanting to kick the tires, taking it lightly and all that. If you approach it in this very serious and loving manner, I find that most people do have experiences.
Yeah.
And that's what's really critical, because then they go from what I call being believers in this phenomenon, maybe believers, into knowers. And that's a very powerful thing, because knowers are the ones then who start talking to their family, to their friends, to their colleagues, and inviting them. And that's how the community grows organically, as people try it on their own and they succeed.
The one thing I would add is, I wouldn't necessarily say serious. I would say lighthearted and open communication.
Right, right.
Positive, and definitely a positive expectation, and let's have fun. Let's communicate. Let's see where good this can go.
Yeah. So
joyful is another good word.
Yeah.
Joyful.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it suited to just experiences or people with a bit of curiosity?
It's suited to anybody who has that open mind. There are people who I encounter every day in my community who had experiences that were foisted on them, that were passive, where they saw a UFO or had a more closer experience of than just seeing. Those are known as contactees and experiencers. So that kind of happened to them, and maybe they revisit this now years later when they find a community like ours and say, "Oh, you mean I can repeat that, but I can consciously go after it instead of passively having it happen to me?" So there's that group of people who were contacted when younger and then rediscover that they can now step up and do this anytime they want. And then there are people who've maybe never had any experiences, but they're open-minded. They've heard their friends talk about it. They've seen the movies. They've been interested in science fiction. And suddenly they hear about our community and go, "You mean they're here and I can contact them? Well, how do I do that?" So they're ready for their first experience. And again, if they're open-minded and put the skepticism aside, they're going to make some kind of contact. One thing I know is that and that has been proven, is our star friends from these many civilizations have very creative ways to contact people.
Right.
And it's not just the lights in the sky, which are, for me, still awesome after all these years. I love to see the ships power up and react to our thoughts and all that. But there are other ways, as Hollis will tell you.
Well, do you want to tell?
I don't know. Maybe at some point you might ask us how we got into this, and that's
Yeah.
where we relate the personal experience that we had that was very unique.
Well, that was I was going to ask. I mean, obviously you saw a need to bring people together because there are many experiences who have not even discussed or spoken to anyone about, what they've gone through, and I can see this as an environment that they can join and kind of feel safe from any ridicule, and I guess that's part of the plan.
Yes.
I was going to say, and knowing that you're not alone is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
If this happens to you and it's never happened to anybody maybe you've been made wrong for it. Maybe for your whole life, because there are kids that this stuff happens to, and everybody tells them they're wrong. And then, they get to be an adult, and at some point they discover the group and go, "Oh, wow, it wasn't just me." And that's a big thing.
Yeah. I hear that every day. This is why it's a community of people. Again, many who will never meet each other, but through social media, we do meet in groups and share stories in a safe place with each other. And it's powerful. It's like anything else. If you've been made wrong for something, as soon as you find one or two other people, your spirits get lifted. You can sit and have a conversation over coffee or tea or whatever, and you don't feel alienated anymore. Mm-hmm. And so what we've created is, and others have created with us, because we're not the only community out there. I think we're the largest. What we've created is a community of all these people who can now share with each other and have support and speak openly about this and even teach it to others and start their own networks, which is wonderful.
And have repeatable experiences. If you're connected to some star visitors, well, they can find you again if you're open to it. But you need to have the support so that you're not like afraid because everybody's made you wrong because they've told you all these bad stories, even though your experience was actually fine. It's again, support, community.
Yeah. I've often wondered, thinking back to my school days, and there was always kids that kind of felt or seemed alienated from particular groups and would kind of almost be a loner. And I think back, and I really feel sympathy for them. And I used to think back and think, maybe things weren't good at home, but now that I've come to understand the nature of this topic, and a lot of experiences that have episodes as kids and can't talk about them, I wonder if some of those kids may have been going through experiences and just couldn't talk about them.
It's a real possibility also for anybody who was born with psychic abilities and was made wrong. Same thing. You learn, like, shut up, kid.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear it. And, these are communities where you can talk about that stuff.
Yeah. Some of the experiences I speak to, and as kids, yeah, I mean, they felt they couldn't talk about it, not even to their own parents about, the stuff that was going on with them, but they wanted to badly, but they felt the only way to deal with it was to kind of, isolate themselves. But they always developed a bond with the ETs that they were having experiences with, and they always, even though it may have scared them initially, they looked forward to their next encounter with them.
I guess you find your friends and family where you can, right? Whether it's blood family and friends or cosmic ones, right?
Right, right.
So, yeah.
Well, what about your experiences then?
Well, what I'm about to relate is something that's similar to many people who come into the community. They've had an initial experience that changes their life, and hopefully for the better when they can talk about it, so that they can launch upon a new adventure. Hollis and I both had initial kind of experiences like that turned out to be very, very positive, and frankly, that's why we're here right now, because of those that changed the course of our lives. So, to cut to the chase, it always helps for me to give background to people before telling my encounter, just to help people appreciate where I was coming from, that my experience didn't just happen out of the blue. I grew up in the American Midwest, and as a young man, I was very much interested in the sky and the stars. I read science fiction voraciously, had my own telescope, was also interested in astronomy. So my interest was always out there, among other things. I was very much a normal kid otherwise, loved baseball and girls and all the usual things.
Mm-hmm.
But my eyes were on the stars. So that set the stage for when I picked up a book on UFOs. Maybe I was around 10 years old. And there was a picture of a classic 1950s saucer shape, with a dome on top.
Right.
Because
right.
there was the contacting movement, as you know, that was very rich in the 50s and 60s in the United States and in other parts of the world. This book was a product of that. The minute I saw this book, I was smitten, and there were pictures in it, and it all seemed to make sense to me. I wanted more. I read other UFO books that I could. This was in the early 60s. There weren't a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
But that sets the stage for years and years later. In 2006, when I discovered on the internet, here in Northern California, where Hollis and I live, I discovered a group of people that go out and claim they can make conscious contact using meditation and these CE5 techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And it was maybe 4 hours from our house. So I said to Hollis, would you come with me for, this is looks like a 6-week trek experience, retreat, where they teach us to do this thing. And I just suddenly rediscovered my interest in UFOs, and these people say that we can actually contact them. Sounds good to me. Would you like to come along? And what she said was,
well, I'm sure it's real,
Mm-hmm.
but no, I've got a business to run. Go, have fun. I support you, but no.
So I went off by myself to have fun. And I have to admit, I went with a sense of a little bit of trepidation, because I grew up with the Hollywood movies that are still being churned out about evil aliens doing this and that and the other thing. And so part of me had a little bit of fear, but the other part was excited like a 5th grader, like, oh boy, I get to try something new. I wonder what's going to happen. So it was with that mix. During that week, we had a lot of experiences. And I would call Hollis every morning back home here and relate to her what the group had experienced the night before. We were seeing the lights in the sky zigzagging around, stationary at times, flashing forth. People would shine their beams up there in the sky, and they would respond.
Mm-hmm.
We would see lighted orbs in the trees floating in, and other things. So I had a lot to talk to Hollis about every morning, like, listen to what happened the night before. This is amazing. Along about the 4th morning, as I was just getting ready on my phone call to tell her about the previous nights, she stopped me and said,
Oh, no, I have a story for you.
And I thought,
Wow.
what could be, she's back home in the Bay Area. What could be cooler than what we saw last night out in the sky? But okay.
Okay.
So before I say what happened, I should, talk about my background a little bit too. I'm a geek, and I grew up like fascinated with the space program. It's like a 5-year-old having the transistor radio to my ear as John Glenn goes up, that. And I mean, I had scrapbooks of this stuff. I was really into it. But I mean, that's actually why I became an engineer, but that's a whole other story. When I was about 10, my dad gave me Chariots of the Gods, which made perfect sense to me. And I should say, I was not into science fiction, like not remotely. Never watched Star Trek, nothing, right? I read Dune. Dad gave me Dunes. I read Dune. That was good. But other than that, like nothing. I fell asleep during Star Wars.
Wow.
The first Star Wars, and I never went back. So really not into it. Okay. So Kosta's up, at this retreat.
Mount Shasta, Northern California.
And, I'm reading it before I go to bed. I'm sitting in bed, I'm reading, and so it's time to go to bed. So I close up the book, put it on the nightstand, turn out the night light. And as I turn around to like scooch down into bed to go to sleep, I should say my night vision is very, very good. I see better in the dark than most people. Okay, so as my eyes adjust very quickly, there's these 4 little beings standing around the foot of the bed looking at me.
Wow.
With maybe a 5th one behind them, like not completely materialized. They are 3.5 to 4 feet tall. Now, they're standing around they have a kind of large head, skinny neck, skinny shoulders, like the head's too big, like proportionally, it's way bigger than a human head would be for the size of the body. I assume they are bipedal, but I don't really know because they're at the foot of the bed, so I can't see through the bed. But I assume. And they're looking at me, and honest to God, I was not at all afraid, because there were waves of love coming off them, like just love. Who could be afraid of that much love? But I was shocked. Like this had never occurred, like nobody had told me this could happen. And my mind went blank, and my mind doesn't ever go blank. My mind went blank.
No, were they communicating with you?
Well, as I sat there, what I hear telepathically, and I should say, I am clairvoyant, I'm clairaudient, and I am a telepath. But I saw these beings with my eyes. That was not clairvoyant vision at all. I know the difference. But I did hear telepathically, very sweet voice go, "Who are you?" Wow. And I didn't even have an answer to that. And my mind is still going blank. And after a while, I think to myself, I should ask them something. What can I ask them? And honestly, finally I think I should ask them where they're from. So I think back, where are you from? And very slowly in my mind, I hear this. Arcturus. Now, again, not interested in astronomy, nothing. So the next morning when I relate the story to Kosta, what I say is that a place? And the thing is, now I will say, it is very possible that somewhere over the years I had heard the word, but I had no conscious memory of that. So I asked him, is that a place?
Yeah, and I said, yeah, it's a super red giant star in a constellation, and I know I'm mispronouncing this, Butes. But yeah, Arcturus is a thing. It's a star. Books have been written about it. Arcturus, Arcturians, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a place, and you didn't know that.
Right, and I totally didn't know that.
And what happened then after?
Well, okay, so when we stared at each other some more, and after a while, they just kind of vanished. They faded away, dematerialized, which today kind of makes me wonder if they were holograms. Like, but I don't, like,
Mhm.
I don't know. There was one other thing. Many years later. So I told the story at somebody else's gathering many years later. And Clifford Stone, who you may have heard of, whose
Mhm.
job in the US military was to go to crash retrievals and
Mhm.
deal with the beings and whatever, because he was telepathic with them. So I do this, and he was in the audience. And he had to get up in the middle for personal reasons, which I totally understand. So he hadn't heard the story. So I tell him the story. And he goes, "Oh, I have a picture for you." And he goes, "I thought I brought this for my talk, and then I didn't use it. I guess I brought it for you." And he goes and he gets me a painting that another woman had done. And it was these beings, only she saw more detail than I did, but it was absolutely the same beings. So
Were they a bluish color?
they were white. They were translucent white.
Okay.
I don't really remember, like maybe some big spaces where there should have been eyes, but like I don't really remember. I just remember these giant heads with kind of pointy chins compared to the size of the bodies. I mean, the bodies look like, an 8-year-old or something.
Did you have any clue why they suddenly appeared to you? I mean, did you unconsciously?
Oh no. Now looking back on it, and I mean, this occurred to me probably the next day. He was calling me all the time. And I'm sure he was thinking about me even more than he was calling me.
Mhm.
And I'm pretty sure they followed his thoughts to me.
Yeah, that was my next question. Maybe there was a connection with what Kosta was doing.
Sure. I will also say, like, as evidence for that, about 2 years later, Kosta had met somebody who lived near San Jose, and this guy decided to go to the retreat, and his wife didn't want to go. So the guy got a ride up with me and Kosta, and we got to know him, whatever. And eventually I met his wife, and she basically told the same story of beings, only in her case way more than me. A ton of beings showed up in their living room
Mm-hmm.
while he was at the retreat. So I'm sure it's that they just followed our energy.
So we had.
And what's interesting is as she finished that story, I thinking that I had the cool stories, my jaw was on the ground, figuratively speaking there, and in surprise. At the same time that I was delighted to hear this, because the next thing she had said to me was,
"Next year I'm coming with you."
So on anytime on interviews like this where we tell this story, I publicly thank those Arcturians, whoever they are, for showing up, because that's exactly the dramatic kind of encounter that it would have taken for Hollis here to really internalize and have her own experience,
right,
and then want to join me in doing this. And we're together now years later still doing this kind of mission. So I'm thankful and grateful to them. Maybe that wasn't their intention, but that was the consequence of it. It got her involved.
Right.
And cool stuff still happens. Like that hasn't happened again, but all kinds of cool stuff still happens.
Well, that sounds eerily similar to an Israeli man that I interviewed recently, Yossi Ronan, and he was back in, I think, 80 or 81. I think he was still a student, and he just went to take an afternoon nap, and during a nap he thought he was dreaming, and the same type of beings turned up, 4 or 5 of them in his room, and they had a conversation, and then they went, and